Welcome to Dollars and Cents, Creating Your Fulfilled Life with Nicole Ramito from Private Vista. In this podcast, we draw from years of experience as well as guest specialists to help you create the life you imagine. Join us in this journey as we enlighten and empower you to align your lifestyle to help you achieve your goals with a clear picture of your future. Now, let's get to the show.
And welcome to the Dollars and Cents podcast with your host, Nicole Ramito. Nicole, it's good to see you. How are you?
You liked my jazz hands, didn't
I did,
you?
yeah. I thought that goes over well, on a podcast.
I know. I'm sorry for our listeners. You couldn't see me channeling my inner baton twirling skills from third grade.
Exactly.
So
what do we have on the table today?
Oh, we have got a great guest and great topic joining me in studio today. So I have my good friend, Lindsey Markus, and she and I are going to have a discussion around estate planning. But as our listeners know, and as we all know, that's a very broad subject. So what Lindsey and I are going to focus on today is kind of how to have the hard conversations and share some stories that we've had clients experience when either the conversations weren't had in a timely manner, or just didn't fully delve deep enough while everyone was competent and alive. So that's kind of high level what we're going to hit on.
Yeah, which is a nice way of saying you want to talk about a couple of things, I think, that probably most people just really don't ever want to talk about.
Well, right. I mean, the two things that Lindsey and I can say are guaranteed in life are death and taxes. Now, Lindsey might disagree because if you work with her, it's potentially to legally avoid or reduce taxes. Right, Lindsey?
Absolutely.
But yeah, so this is a subject, understandably, that most people they want to kick the can down the road. And what Lindsey and I hope to do is by sharing some experiences, sharing some ideas, maybe make it a little more palatable to start to think about how to have the conversation with your loved ones.
Well, good, because any way you can facilitate that conversation would be welcome.
Yes. So before we jump in, because I know Lindsey has a wealth of knowledge to share, and I guess we'll probably have her back on a follow-up episode. For our listeners, I'd like to give a brief bio. So as I mentioned, I've got Lindsey Paige Markus in studio with me. She is a shareholder with Chuhak Tecson, PC, which is a boutique law firm in Chicago, and she leads the firm's 25 attorney private wealth services group. In her special practice, she assists business owners and families in planning their estates, protecting assets, transferring wealth, and as I highlighted, minimizing taxation. She works closely with her clients to formulate succession plans, advise on business formation, maximize wealth preservation, and minimize gift and estate taxation. Oof, say that 5 times fast, Lindsey. She is licensed in Illinois, New York, and Florida. And she does have a national practice. I've seen her firsthand in action and can confirm she is extremely passionate about educating clients and advisors about death and taxes. She often appears on local television shows, and she's authored a book called A Gift for the Future, Conversations about Estate Planning. And that was published in April of 2022. And you can certainly find that very easily on Amazon. So with that, I do want to say welcome.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me today.
Well, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule so we can have this conversation and educate some additional people out there. So I think with that, as I highlighted, Lindsey, estate planning is a very broad topic. So we're really kind of talking about, I think a lot of the common situations we see in today's world is oftentimes people might be on a second or third marriage or relationship. One or both people may be bringing children into the picture from prior relationships. So that's certainly, I know, a thread or conversation that we want to have about that, because that comes with its own special conversations and different strategies that might be applicable. But even if you, for our listeners, if you're on your first marriage and the only children you have are together, it doesn't really make the conversation that much easier. So I know this will still apply to you as well if you're in that situation. We do want to get into about how you're distributing your estate, because we know that equitable does not have to be equal. We're going to highlight as well one of the things that maybe as we were first starting out might have surprised Lindsey and I, but really no more, is oftentimes the big disagreements or in extreme cases, the tearing apart of the families doesn't come from the financial assets. So just wanted to give our listeners a little taste of where Lindsey and I are thinking our conversation's going to go. With that, I'm thinking, Lindsey, a great place to start or kick this off is, why don't we talk about, is equitable equal?
We have this conversation with countless families, not just blended families, but also a first marriage where the spouses have children together. And the concept is, imagine that I have 3 children. Is the expectation that all 3 of the children will share a third? Or if one of the children became the next Bill Gates and doesn't need the money, and the other 2 decided to pursue alternative careers, perhaps in the school system, educating children with special needs, or philanthropy, and aren't earning as much, they might be in a situation where they may need more. It's very interesting to see where different families come out on this. I wish I could explain why some are drawn to one rule of reasoning versus the other, but there are some families that no matter what, even if one of the children becomes the next Bill Gates, they want everything going a third, a third, a third. There are some, though, that recognize their son Bill might not need the money, and it might be better directed towards the other 2 children. And maybe there are other things that they could leave in terms of perhaps mom and dad have a donor advised fund, and they want to leave their son, who has been wildly successful, name him as the successor donor advisor to that donor advised fund, and let him carry on the family's philanthropic legacy. I think the problem we run into, though, goes back to the heart of what we're talking about today, is these conversations can be difficult. And a lot of clients don't know where to start with them. And because they don't know where to start, they often just don't do anything.
Right. And that coupled with, if you have more than one child, it's still kind of a no-no or taboo that you don't ever want to show favoritism. So even though the mom and dad might say, we think this is equitable, are the kids going to feel that way? And so I think that leads to not having the conversation as well.
I agree with you. I think, though, you can embark upon the conversations. And for the families that have been bold enough to go down those paths, the matriarch and patriarch, or 2 patriarchs or 2 matriarchs, depending on the family makeup, have been pleasantly surprised at how that I've seen this work with.
I agree.
At how open and receptive the children and the family members are to having these conversations.
Yeah.
I've had instances where the wildly successful son, they're worried that they're going to hurt his or her feelings, whomever that person is. And when they sit down and talk about it, the child says, no, oh my God, I don't want it. Of course, I'm in the process of spending down my estate to try and minimize my own estate taxes. I'd much rather have it be directed here or there, or whatever it is that you guys want to do. But having those candid conversations and managing expectations, I think, really does tend to avoid a lot of the conflict that we often see later.
I agree. I've also had a couple, I'm thinking of a couple client situations where multiple children, all from the same parents, but with your example, one child needed the help, but they needed it today. So the parents weren't going anywhere. We were all happy about that. But they said, our one child needs the help. You've answered the question, Nicole and Private Vista, that we're not going to derail our path of, staying on sound financial footing. So why wait? if we can help him or her now, we're not hurting ourselves. We can live life. But a couple of the questions we brought up is, okay, so, because, it wasn't like $10,000, it was a meaningful amount of money. And so we had a couple of questions. To your point, there was multiple degrees of success and financial situations amongst the adult kids. But also, too, we were saying, okay, so is that, of course, we had them talk with their estate planning attorney for the gift tax returns and things like that. But we're like, but do you want this to be in advance? Or do you want it to come off the top? Are you just going to say, there's enough money to go around and we're going to help the one now? And they were like, we didn't even think to that part of the conversation.
Yeah. And so this idea or concept of an advancement is a great thing to highlight to clients and for clients to be aware of, especially when there might be different treatment or assistance to different family members. And it's based on the idea that if I'm the child that's getting this advancement, let's say it's $500,000, if it's going to be characterized as an advancement, that means at the time that we're distributing mom and dad's estate, that it's treated as if I already got $500,000 in advance. Whereas if it's coming off the top, I'm just getting it, I would get the $500,000 and then my proportionate equal share of everything else. And again, I've seen different families treat it differently. The best way to avoid the conflicts and the surprises is to embark on those conversations that you've been prompting your clients to do. And it's really easy to update the estate plan to provide for that. It's just a simple amendment. The grantor or settlor made a gift of X number of dollars to this child. That distribution, that shall be treated as an advancement for purposes, or that should not be treated as an advancement, just to avoid any ambiguity.
I agree. And I think just to highlight for our listeners, it is always good to memorialize this in your estate planning document, so it's in writing. And then also, too, then the attorney, who's a third party, if the conversations weren't had at all with the children or with all of them, the attorney can lend some context or history of, here's what your mom and dad were trying to do. Not ideal. You or any of the other attorneys don't want to be in that position, but you have that. The other thing I think it talks about, too, is having that conversation where I think if the conversation, well, like you said, I've been surprised too by how the reactions of the kids, and more often than not, they're like, absolutely, that makes total sense. And, so when with the examples you showed, so that helps. But then I think also too, it's like saying, do you, even if the other children don't need it, do you want to say, I've seen examples where they've said, well, and then we're going to add interest on that amount. Like, so the other kids are compensated for that kind of opportunity cost of the advancement.
Yes, we can take into consideration interest or make an adjustment for inflation. Depending on how the family wishes to treat it. Yeah,
I agree. The other thing I've seen too is oftentimes as clients that they're talking with their attorney and they do, a third, or however they decide it, I have found it helpful where we will actually quantify what that looks like for a couple of reasons. First of all, a lot of times clients will forget to bring in life insurance, or if they have their own like GST trusts or trusts from estate planning from prior generations, so that everyone's getting a full picture of what's flowing where and when. But I've also seen, Lindsey, and I'm sure you have too, where if there's like a family business involved and maybe, especially if you have more than one child, not all children are either involved or not involved to the same extent. So I've seen that to be helpful for a client where it's like, well, let's kind of quantify who's getting what, because this was an example of a third. Only one child was involved with the business, so that was going in their column. But when you started looking at the values of the business versus the liquid estate, it wasn't adding up. And so that was kind of an illuminating moment for the client where they were like, oh, well, a third sounded equitable, but really, it doesn't even work, or the person getting the business is getting no liquidity.
For sure. And just because there's equity this year when the plan is put in place doesn't necessarily the equity will be consistent in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Right.
And I think that underscores one of the benefits of clients working with advisory teams that are collaborative, authorizing and encouraging the communication between your attorney, your CPA, your wealth management team, so that we can have some of these conversations and help highlight some of these issues, not just for today, but what it might look like in the future. For family businesses in particular, I've had a handful of clients use life insurance as an equalization mechanism to help provide for equity and liquidity for the various family members. And there's one family in particular out of several that I've worked with. There's one in particular where they on their own proactively, or even if I'm the one to mention it, they immediately follow up with getting the analysis done, looking at the value of the assets periodically and how that breakdown, or division will work, taking into consideration that one son who's really taken the lead in the family business and is working there day in and day out, looking at what he's getting relative to his two siblings who are not at all active in the business. They're not even in the same state.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, the wishes of the parents have changed, right? When the one child who was working in the business was junior, it was very important that things were a third down the line. As that child in the business has also contributed tremendous value to growing the business, they don't have the same a third, dollar for dollar. And they've taken that into consideration as well, thinking about the value that that child has added.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've also seen too, when you're looking at the type of stock shares, if multiple siblings are or aren't involved, or to varying degrees, where you can still have the siblings maybe participate in the value, but make sure that the one or those who are actually actively participating in running the business maintain the control. So they get the majority of the voting shares or all the voting shares. So all of a sudden, you don't have the conflict or competing interests if people have different ideas of how they want to extract the value from the business.
It's a great point, and I think it's a tool that's often overlooked. I think business owners are so busy growing their business and fueling their business,
right,
that they don't often know or understand some of those nuances. And the ability to take an LLC and create voting and non-voting membership interests, or in a C corporation or S corporation, create voting and non-voting shares of stock, can do tremendous things and open up a whole new avenue of planning opportunities, in addition to allowing us the flexibility to build in the opportunity to take discounts for estate tax and gift tax valuation purposes, where the IRS recognizes that a non-voting membership interest or a non-voting share in a corporation isn't worth dollar for dollar, but maybe worth 70 cents on the dollar when we take into consideration those discounts for lack of marketability and lack of control.
Yeah, excellent point. Excellent point, which to our listeners, just wanted to circle back. That's how working with Lindsey or an estate planning attorney, you want an attorney who specializes or focuses in this area, because there are lots of options and strategies that might be applicable to your situation, help you reduce or in some cases avoid or eliminate estate taxes. And I know we're not going to get into it today, but for those of our listeners who are in Illinois, and there's maybe about 10 other states, some states, I know Illinois does, still has a state estate tax as well. So that's why it's important not only to have an attorney who focuses on this, but is licensed and knowledgeable in your specific state where you're going to be registered or domiciled.
Yes, Illinois and New York are two incredibly expensive places to die, as is Massachusetts, and there are a handful of others. But
Yes.
Like you said before, with proactive planning, we can minimize or sometimes avoid it.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, so Lindsay, where do we want to go now? Maybe do we want to talk a little bit about how to have the conversation or things to consider if you're just starting down this path?
I think it's kind of like tackling cleaning your closet or a task that you really don't want to do.
I was like, that's a bad example for me. You know, I love to purge. So
I didn't know that.
I do.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
I'm your gal. If you
Okay.
need, as the kids are growing and you need to organize and get rid of things, I'm your gal.
Okay. Very, very good to know, because God knows I could use help in that area. Or any task that you don't love tackling. The anticipation and the anxiety and connection with it is far worse than the actual task itself.
Yep.
And I think
Absolutely.
that's another benefit for listeners to consider, is to use and lean on your strategic advisors, your wealth management team, your CPAs, your attorneys. They probably know from years of experience in working with you and your family how to best couch those conversations. And as advisors, we can help coach the clients in terms of ideas on how to bring up the topic and how to embark on some of those conversations. And as we've seen with some of the families, it doesn't necessarily have to be about the money. This is how much money there is. This is how much money you are getting, but rather a preliminary introduction to our advisory team in case of emergency. If something happens to us, these are our people. These are who you should reach out to, and start the conversations with just those getting to know yous. And from there, start to educate the children on types of investments and decision making, on types of estate planning tools. So they have an idea for the method to our madness.
Yes.
And in practice, what we've seen is that when the beneficiaries, the children, the grandchildren, over time are educated on the purpose behind the structures we've implemented, they're far more likely to be respected and followed. So just start talking. I think that's the best rule of advice.
Hey, pardon the interruption. I know you are listening to Dollars and Cents, Creating Your Fulfilled Life with Nicole Romito, and we're happy you're here. If you have any questions, please head over to myprivatevista.com or the show notes to find out how to reach us. We'd love to hear from you.
I agree. And I know when we've had these conversations too, oftentimes when you're having, your advisory team as part of the conversation, generally speaking, people are on better behavior or their best behavior, right? When I haven't met Lindsey and Nicole before. And, obviously mom and dad respect them or have worked with them. So maybe I won't bring up the fact I think Sister Sally's getting an unfair share or start the ribbing or fighting. So I know we've seen that too. I think the kids also have enjoyed meeting the team. So to your point, they know who to call if you have both parents went down in the plane or things like that. And two, exactly, you don't really need to pull out the balance sheet. There's some cases I know we've done it where not ever, but certainly not in the earlier parts of these conversations. You can talk more about structures, the goals. We've seen it where the parents, maybe they don't even want to start off with the money, but it's talking about the value and, what the family business has allowed for the family through the generations, why they're thinking of this is the plan for disposition, or here's our hope that it'll continue. So I know we've seen a lot about here's the kind of the whys and our values. And in particular, I'll just add on, circling back to a comment you made before, oftentimes the families we're working with, they have a certain level of wealth. They're able to live exactly how they want. And the goal is to get the money down to future generations. But oftentimes, if you have a charitable inclination, some type of, and listeners, we have some other episodes on donor advised funds and comparing that to private family foundations and such. But there are different ways where you can do it. Of course, there's tax benefits, but it's really passing down. Here's the organizations we've supported and why. And you can even be like, these are really important to us. We want you to continue on. Or this is why it was important to us, but please, whatever's near and dear to your heart, this is a great way for you guys to create your values and legacies for the future generations.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful thing to see the family come together for philanthropy.
It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I've also seen them come together. I believe you mentioned this too, is when one sibling or if there's a family member who is special needs and to the point where they'll never be self-sufficient. I've seen that another topic or conversation that can really rally the family together.
Absolutely. Just talking about these things and coming together and being proactive in planning, because if the right steps are not taken, you could have a situation where that special needs beneficiary is displaced from their facility or other issues that arise.
Yeah, exactly. There's definitely, I think, with all things with estate planning, the devil's in the details. But in particular, when you have special needs or you want to do, your thoughts are equitable is not equal. We talked a lot about blended families. There's different things of how do you, depending on where you want assets to go. Oftentimes I've seen where, well, gosh, if I go first, I want my spouse to be able to live in the house or have access to this level of real estate for as long as they're alive. So, right, you can do things like I've seen
Absolutely.
Yeah. Go on.
And then it becomes critical again to go back to the advisory team, the wealth management team, to make certain that there are sufficient assets to provide for those needs.
Yes, absolutely.
And then, especially in the case of a blended family, to think about, well, do my children from a prior marriage or relationship, do they need to wait till my current spouse dies in order to get something? Or is there enough there whereby I can set something aside for them right away? And those planning decisions and those ideas, there's no one size fits all. It requires a lot of give and take, or a dance, if you will, as I describe it with my clients, of coming up with an idea, testing it in the modeling to make sure that there are resources and assets available. And then my job as the drafter is actually pretty easy once we do all that other work.
Right.
But it does require collaboration and planning.
It does. And that's also one where life insurance could be useful as well. If there's a big age difference between the spouses, where you said you have the conversations, a lot of times clients don't think through to that level of detail. So they do the high flow, and then either they might want to leave the liquid assets for that spouse, so they're never worrying about having enough money, but you could still do life insurance to give some liquidity at the passing of the actual biological parent.
Absolutely. And then on the topic of blended families, and for Illinois listeners in particular, I think it's really important for them to know that in 2020, Illinois made so many changes to their trust law, they renamed the law. It has virtually no impact on you during your life with respect to your revocable living trust. But there are all these places in the new trust code, the Illinois Trust Code, that require the trustee must do X unless the trust provides otherwise. And in practice, since this has taken effect, one of the biggest headaches we've encountered has been with blended families, because one of the new provisions says that a qualified beneficiary, so a contingent beneficiary, someone who's next in line, can demand an accounting of the trust assets unless the trust provides otherwise. And you can imagine how that can create headaches and conflict amongst family members, where the children from a prior marriage or relationship are demanding an accounting of how their stepmother or stepfather are using the funds.
Right.
And there are other ways we can have checks and balances. But again, I think it goes back to being knowledgeable and informed about what's going on.
Yes. I've also seen that where there's been different approaches on how the trust investments, how the trust is invested for the liquid part of it, right? Because if I'm living on it, I'm probably going to want to be more conservative. So I'm happy with my muni bonds paying their yield. But if I'm the next generation or second generation, I might be like, hey, I want to jazz this up for growth because
Yes.
I'm not even planning on touching these assets for 20, 30 years. So I know we've seen competing interests from that angle too.
It makes a big difference. And then it
It
goes back
does.
to, well, who's the trustee? Who gets to
Right.
decide? Who's
Yeah.
in control?
Yeah. That sounds like a fun job in that situation. So
Not so glamorous.
no, not so glamorous. Well, Lindsey, we could sit here and talk all week. Why don't we, in wrapping up, if you want to highlight maybe a couple key takeaways for our listeners of either, highlighting what we discussed, or if you want to say, here's 3 things on how to start the conversation, whatever you want to do to kind of just punch up some key takeaways for our listeners.
Absolutely. I think the topic of hard conversations is a great starting point. And again, the best way to embark upon it is to start, have those conversations. If you don't have an estate plan, take the time to sit down and get one in place. If you have an estate plan, take the time to have it reviewed. There have been changes in trust code provisions. There have been changes in the tax code, with more expecting with the sunset of the tax exemption in 2026, that really demand you look at what your lifelong earnings will become and make sure that everything is documented in a way that matches the legacy that you want to leave. Embark upon those conversations, and when in doubt, sit down and talk with the family.
I love that. And I couldn't agree more. It is a scary topic. I think as human beings, I don't know if it's the media, TV, movies, things like that. You always think, oh, I don't know, is this going to tear the family apart, or the kids aren't ready, or, there's a whole host of reasons of not to do it. But I agree. It's like ripping off a Band-Aid. Once you start the conversation, more often than not, you're probably going to be pleasantly surprised of the relief on both sides, and the fact that kind of now everyone can understand what's going on. And as you highlighted, kind of the why behind the decisions. Well, thanks so much for joining me and sharing what I will tell our listeners is a small sliver of your knowledge and experience. So I appreciate you taking the time. As you know, I ask all my guests a question in closing. If you could live anywhere in the world, you had no constraints, no financial, no time, you didn't need to be in a certain school district, anything like that, where would you live and why?
I'd say in a small town outside of Florence, Italy.
Ooh, do you have a certain small town in mind? Or maybe
I'd
you
have
don't want
to
to share it?
explore some more. I studied abroad when I got my master's in international economics and finance in Italy, and Italy to this day continues to be one of my favorite destinations. I love the food, I love the art, the architecture, the energy, the fashion,
Yeah.
and there's just a charm that I feel when I'm there.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. Florence is one of my favorite cities. And there's the little towns around it. It's just amazing. So perfect. So my real ulterior motive for asking my guests this, I'm putting together my travel list.
I love it.
So coming to you soon. Thanks again. If our listeners would like to reach out and get in contact with you, what's the best way to do so?
You can reach me at Markus, Markus, at Chuhak, CHUHAK.com. Look me up on the web, or check out if you want to read more about my work and my world of death and taxes. A Gift for the Future is available on Amazon. Conversations about estate planning. But reach out. I'd love to have a conversation.
All right. That is a great conversation. I always love hearing the answers of your guests, Nicole, about where they go if they could just be anywhere. And every time, I just want you to know, I change my mind.
Yeah. Well, that's why I just added to the list.
Exactly. So we will be looking for that book. Okay. So we know how to get a hold of Lindsey. For listeners who are listening who don't know how to reach out to you, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So they can either call our main line at 312-831-4370. Ask for me. Our receptionist can direct you. Or you can check out our website at myprivatevista.com. On our homepage, there's a Contact Us button. Please put your information there, reference this episode, and myself or one of my fabulous colleagues will be sure to get in touch with you.
And they are truly all fabulous colleagues. That's not a hyperbole on your part. For those of you who are listening to this conversation for the first time and are not yet a subscriber, you can do something that's very simple immediately. Just reach out and hit the follow button. Become a subscriber. That way, every time Nicole drops a new edition of her podcast, you're notified and you can give it a listen. I would also ask that if you like it, if you find it useful, tell people about it, share it. We appreciate that. Thanks. Until next time, I'm Bill Tucker on behalf of Nicole and everybody at My Private Vista. Thank you for taking the time to listen today. And remember, you can go out today and make it a great day or not. You do have a choice. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to the Dollars and Cents Creating Your Fulfilled Life with Nicole Romito, sponsored by Private Vista. Visit our website at www.myprivatevista.com or give us a call at 312-831-4370. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Private Vista is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. This is not an offer to buy or sell securities. No investment process is free of risk, and there is no guarantee that the investment process or the investment opportunities referenced herein will be profitable. Past performance is neither indicative nor a guarantee of future results. The investment opportunities referenced herein may not be suitable for all investors. All data or other information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable. Any opinions, news, research, analyses, prices, or other data or information contained in this presentation is provided as general market commentary and does not constitute investment advice. Private Vista and Hightower Advisors, LLC, or any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties expressed or implied as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for statements or errors or omissions, or results obtained from the use of this information. Private Vista and Hightower Advisors, LLC assume no liability for action made or taken in reliance on or relating in any way to this information. The information is provided as of the date referenced. Such data and other information are subject to changes without notice. This was created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed herein are solely those of the authors and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors, LLC, or any of its affiliates.